but the biggest challenge of them all could be the fact that being a rival to Bo Greaves, and it's just great for the game. All the attention in the world was on darts, and all the attention was on women's darts, and that was down to that trailblazer, Fallon Sherrock.
Hello, welcome along to the latest edition of the Story of Series here at the MODUS Super Series on Pluto TV, where we delve into the careers of some of the stars within the sport. And today we are having a look back at the career of the trailblazing queen of the palace, Fallon Sherrock, the first ever female player to ever win a game at the World Championship, the first ever winner of the Women's World Match Play, the first ever female player to hit a 9-darter in front of the cameras. And that was hit in this particular building here. We're going to be having a look at her career in the company of the 2020 Premier League champion, Glenn Dunn. Now, you and Fallon go back a fair long way, don't you? From BDO days to PDC rivals. You two have a lot in common with one another.
I think as you were talking there, my first thoughts were representing England together. But as long as we've known each other, I've never really got that close to Fallon. I mean, she is someone who is very much, she keeps her friends very close to her as well. But my first thought is when she represented England as a youth player, and yeah, we all knew the talent that she had then. But that transition into the seniors is never that easy.
And it's an interesting story with Fallon because she came through, and I think a lot of people forget this, she came through as an amazing youth player, played at the World Championships as a teenager. Almost that part of her career is a little bit forgotten.
Yeah, certainly not by the purists and people who know the game as well, because, I know England darts are very proud of the way that Fallon's gone on to achieve the big things there. The fundamentals are there as a youth player. You can tell, but so many youth players have had that incredible raw talent. But as you then go through that transition, people start families and, work, things like that. So, it's not that many that go through and then do what Fallon's done. It's not easy.
And people forget about her exploits at the Lakeside because of everything that happened at Ali Pali, because of everything that happened in other arenas. But she played in a World Championship final at the age of 21, which probably in the era of Luke Little, they think, okay, what's that? But at that time, particularly in the women's side of the sport, there wasn't many young players at that point coming through. Trina was still very established, Lisa Ashton was very established, Anastasia, Dita Hedman, the like. Fallon Sherrock was the player that then came through, that first real young superstar that came onto the scene. Yeah,
and I like the word that you used in her introduction, a trailblazer. And I guess that's not what the game had really seen. That player come through and, she was good for the game. But hopefully we talk about the fact of what she's got about her as well, because not only has she got this talent, but she's blessed with, what Luke Littler has, what the Phil Taylors have, and that's that incredible resilience and character. And hopefully that shines through in this interview as well. But that's when she came to the fore, and like I said, she moved across into seniors, very seamless. That beautiful fluid throw that she's got. And that was on the back of her already winning senior titles as well. So it was a fantastic start to her career.
She would lose that final to Lisa Ashton, but we say about so many great players that actually sometimes what you learn is probably more in defeat than you do maybe if she was to win that final. We've said that about, of course, Luke Littler in the past.
Yeah, and at that time, Lisa Ashton was just unbelievable on that stage, and I don't think that'll have been any surprise to Fallon, but I've said it many, many times with this mic in the hand, Jack, you don't lose, you learn, and Fallon clearly went away from there and just became this all-round player.
She did. Okay, it wasn't easy straight away for Fallon. She had a couple of lean years, perhaps just a little bit after. But then around about 2018, she looked like she found a second wind in her career.
Yeah, just sort of before we go into that far, she moved to Middlesbrough for a while. And we took her to a few tournaments where she was beating everybody. The times I played her in an open final. And it was that stigma attached at the time. To man versus woman, etc. It was like, she changed the boundaries of all that. And in the end, when she wasn't in Middlesbrough very long, but she left a legacy there. She even represented our county darts as well. And, the numbers in the crowd got bigger and bigger. So even in them very early days, she was learning so much about herself. And, no one knew what was about to come.
No one would know what was to come. We will talk about that a little bit more in due course. But then she has her breakthrough. You won the men's world trophy. She won the women's world trophy in 2018 at Preston Guildhall. That was a time where everybody came out to see you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was at least 30 people in there. But
Biggest crowd ever.
I remember the Zydedown Masters, the Finders Masters 2015, and I have a photo of us winning that together as well. So, I have stood next to Fallon a few times where I've won the men's and she's won the ladies as well. So, she's quite a complex character. And like I say in my opening statement there, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm really close to Fallon, but I think there's an awful lot of respect there. And by 2018, she was up there. And when she won that world trophy as well, she was arguably the best player at that time.
Then 2019 came. 2 players from the women's team, it was actually a qualifier back then, were able to qualify directly for the World Championships. Now, Fallon didn't qualify the first year, but then there was talk about other players. Of course, Lisa was still the dominant force within the sport, winning 4 world titles. Then Mikuru Suzuki came onto the scene, won Lakeside, won it comprehensively as well against Lorraine Winstanley. And people forget, Mikuru had darts to beat James Richardson at that infamous World Championship.
Yeah, certainly. And like I said, it was at that time where, the women players are crying out for that attention as well. And, it could have been oh so different if Mikuru hits that double against James Richardson as well. But Mikuru, left her own legacy at Lakeside. And all this time, Fallon was just growing into what was she's about to be. Heavily winning on the BDO circuit, massive amount of open wins. So, despite the knocks that she was having, the very, very best was to come.
Was she simmering underneath the surface at that time?
I think you do. Like I said, there's not that many Luke Littlers about where everything's happening at the age of 16 and 17. You've got to ride with the punches a little bit. And like I said, she was quietly but effectively just getting on with the job. And, you should never chase success. It will come. And like I said, around about 2019-20, that success really did come to the top for Fallon.
Let's talk about that said championship then, and begin with that game against Ted Evans. As I mentioned, a few days prior, Mikuru Suzuki had darts to beat James Richardson. Now, pundits, commentators, bloggers, whatever you want to call them, probably said out of the 2 players at that tournament, Mikuru Suzuki had the best chance of winning a game at that World Championship. She was the best female player in the world at the time. Yeah. It wasn't up for debate. She'd won the World Championship. She'd go on to win the next World Championship as well, at the Indigo. But then Fallon Sherrock took on Ted Evans, and realistically, I think a lot of people thought Ted, the way he was playing at the time, he was doing well on the development tour. He was a player that was moving in the right direction. There was an expectation Ted would probably win that game and win that game quite heavily. But something that night just seemed to click. And in particular for Fallon, it was the clutch finishing, wasn't it?
I'll just go back to what you said there, something about that night. Now, let me tell you, I was in that section of the draw. I ended up playing Chris Dobie in the end, but that fascination was there, that the fact that if I do get to the last 16 or the quarters, I'll be playing Fallon Sherrock. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I played Daryl Gurney the night that Ted Evans played there, but the atmosphere in the building that night, and I stayed around because Chris was following that game as well, Chris Dobie. The atmosphere when Ted Evans was beginning to struggle, when that realisation was kicking in that Fallon could go on and win this game, it was an atmosphere that it's probably only been beaten recently, but it was unbelievable.
What did Fallon do so right in that particular game?
She's just got bottle. She has got, and you remember the clutch finishes you've just mentioned there, in particular double 18, ice through the veins, something that you can't teach. These skills and abilities are there to be seen with all the titles. She can show that. But what you can't really highlight and focus is a player's attributes, to stand there, that expectation, to be adaptable, to be versatile under the situation she was in. But more importantly, show that character that we began to know Fallon Sherrock. And you could see Ted wilt. Because remember, this was now going to be the first player, lady player, to win at the Worlds and smash that glass ceiling. And the people who were there that night were treated to something spectacular. Like I said, the atmosphere was second to none.
And not just then would she do it, then the attention she got afterwards. Now, let's be honest, at that point, even after some of the famous games, when Phil Taylor retired, the Barneveld final, there'd never been an attention quite like what happened that night. Fallon Sherrock would go on every single TV morning program the day after. The New York Times would be writing about her. Billie Jean King, one of the most famous sports people on the planet, would treat Fallon. Maybe in the landscape of darts in 2025, that may feel a little bit more normal now. But back in 2019, this was obscene.
Yeah, it broke the internet, didn't it? And that's when things can get a little bit difficult as well, because that's when social media sort of come to the fore as well. So for every positive thing that there was there for Fallon, she had to deal with incredibly difficult tweets, very difficult statuses that people were putting on, because that's when you get the jealousy. But that made her just so strong. I thought she handled that better than even the darts as well. But yeah, all the attention in the world was on darts, and all the attention was on women's darts, and that was down to that trailblazer, Fallon Sherrock.
Is that side of it more difficult than actually playing it? Because you know what you're doing when you're at an hockey, but when you're going into a TV studio to be interviewed by Piers Morgan at 7 a.m. in front of 3 million people, that's a different feeling altogether.
Well, number one, I don't know, but what I will say is the fact that, very similar to Kim Hybrids, I could read 99 messages, and if one of them was bad, I'd focus on that. So Fallon dealt with all the attention so well. And like I say, it made her a better person. She became thick-skinned. She handled it. She had excellent management around her, brilliant family. And in the end, it was just a young player, a young female player who wanted to play darts. And, she still had a game against Mensa Suljovic to come.
Sometimes in sport, when things happen, it turns out to be a one-off result. Maybe like an FA Cup upset, an FA Cup giant killing. A team might beat Manchester United. Mind you, everyone probably beat Manchester United now. But then maybe in the next round would then lose to a lower league opposition. But for Fallon, that success against Ted Evans would almost be superseded by what she would do against Mensa Suljovic, who at the time was still in around the top 10 in the world, in the top 16.
Yeah, and boy, did he wilt. And like many, I didn't expect Fallon to win that next game. I thought that was the moment. She smashed the glass ceiling. I thought that was it then. But if you remember, all of a sudden, it didn't start so well, but then the odd double just began, and then the crowd involvement. I mean, they played a huge part. I mean, it was prime time, a Saturday night, 9 o'clock. I mean, the whole world was there to see this player smashing the internet. Darts was rock and roll, and women's darts in particular, women's sport, the interest. And she handled it so well, because she's quite quiet and meek in the practice room. She doesn't practice an awful lot. But the attention, the aura that was around her at that point was unbelievable, and she dealt with it magnificently well.
Is it fair to say that at that point in time, she was the most famous dart player in the world, beyond Van Gerwen, who would go on to lose in the final to Peter Wright, more famous than the world champion, you could say?
Yeah, the interest was unbelievable because of what it was doing for, our sport. We were crying out for a woman player to do well at the World Championships, and that whole, equality in darts, what people wanted to see, and to see it on the biggest stage of them all was unbelievable. It was an incredible time for Fallon Sherrock.
Then she'd go on to play Chris Dobie after the game against Mensa. She'd get to the post-Christmas rounds of the World Championship. Then it's another level in terms of opposition, but another level in terms of the press attention. And some of the things that are written about Chris prior to that game were not nice at all.
Well, I quite like that, what they were writing about Chris, but that's...
that was you who wrote that, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's another story. But at that point there... But Chris is, I know it's not about the story of Chris Dobie, but he handled the situation very well. And I'm getting a bit nervous now, because now I'm playing the winner of that game. So, who do I want to play? My best friend or Fallon Sherrock, where the whole crowd's going to be against me? An experience I do have later on in the story. But it was a magnificent, and as good as Fallon Sherrock was that week, the way Chris Dobie handled the situation, it was sort of the beginning of him as well.
So Chris would go on to win that game, but there was still so much attention, so many headlines. And then the conversations had, could Fallon Sherrock be in the Premier League? Now, that was very quickly battered away by the PDC. First and foremost, she wasn't a tour card holder, so in their eyes, there wasn't an eligibility. But at that point, the Premier League were playing the Contenders programme, where 9 players would be given the full pick for Premier League, and then for each of the opening nights before you had the relegation, contenders would come in and they'd play a one-off night, usually either at a nearby venue, or players that suited the bill for the PDC would participate. Now, on the back of that, Fallon would get picked. And she got a lovely draw, by the way, when she was given her game in the Premier League.
Well, it wasn't a draw. So I was at Weatherby Races and I got the call, you're in the Premier League. And he said, that's the good news. And I was like, how on earth can there be bad news today? He said, week 2, you are playing Fallon Sherrock in Nottingham. So that was like incredible. It might have been week 3, but certainly I was riding the crest of a wave by beating Michael Smith week 1. But as soon as that winning dart went in against Michael, I was already thinking of Fallon Sherrock. But I didn't realise how big of an occasion it was going to be.
What was it like playing her in that atmosphere?
The most difficult game I've ever had, and I was strong in the mind. And I thought I handled it well because things started well in that game. But just like against Mensa Sulovic, she pings a double 18 from nowhere. She never looked like missing a double, and I'm beginning to panic at that point then. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but I was 5-3 down or 6-4 down, and I pulled out a couple of clutch finishes to draw the game 6-6, and I guess it's the best draw I've ever had in the world of darts.
And then in terms of moving forward, now obviously COVID happened, the pandemic happened. She was invited to all the World Series in 2020, which included what was going to be the first event at the Madison Square Garden in New York. She had to be there because of the affinity, particularly the American public had with Fallon. And I suppose this is also part of the story, was this was a worldwide story.
Yeah, but then that's when the jealousy also kicks in as well. That's when people are saying she was getting fast-tracked into competitions, but the broadcasters want them in. The crowd wanted her in. I mean, it just made total sense. Like you mentioned there, she was the most famous dart player on the planet at that point, and rightly should she be in. And I think she handled the whole situation incredibly well.
As you mentioned, there was a lot of other things that go with it. I suppose with any success story, that there's two sides that go with the coin. And Fallon's had to deal with a lot of horrible things that perhaps most players would never have to deal with or couldn't contemplate dealing with.
But let me tell you, she handled it unbelievably well. I can't remember coming out and saying, people are saying this about me, that about me. If anything, she just sort of left that to the management, who were brilliant. They dealt with the whole press thing, and I had my time. I was always very precious about my Bell's palsy, so I could read 1,000 things, but if they attack that, and then I made it public that if there's one thing that hurt me was the fact that, my right eye can sometimes look very tired. She didn't, no one really knew how she dealt with it. Only she could really answer that. I just thought, this youth player who I met in 2011 had just grown into this fantastic player, and she handled everything so well.
Let's talk about some of the other successes she had. First of all, one of them on that stage just behind us there, the first ever female player to hit a 9-darter in front of the cameras.
It's funny because I'm one of the biggest fans of the MODUS Super Series when I'm at home. I watch it so much, and I just happened to be watching that game, and it was unbelievable. To do a 9-darter, to do it at the MODUS Super Series, to be the first player, it had to be Fallon.
It had to be Fallon, and the ripple-on effect that had, it's still the most viewed video on our YouTube channel. It's probably the most recognisable... it is the most recognisable moment of the Super Series, beyond what Luke's done here. It's the most iconic moment that's ever happened here. And Fallon just has this aura where if it's something big that's going to happen, if it's something that's going to be etched into the history books, it's going to be Fallon Sherrock that does it.
Yeah, and like I said, and she just calmly took a dart out, didn't she? There wasn't a great deal of reaction. I think just a little fist pump as she was walking, that little element of shock when she'd done it. But that's her. She's very grounded. Like I said, she's always had good people around her. And right at this moment, we talk about the fact that she's got the best practice partner in the world. So everything's worked out so well for Fallon Sherrock. From that girl of 2011, going to the World Cup and winning the singles, to where she is right now, what she's done in the game. The story of Fallon Sherrock is positive all the way.
She got given invites to the World Series. Now, there was one or two sceptics about the fact that she was given the whole package. But she would then again prove people wrong by getting to the final in Denmark.
Yeah, that was incredible, wasn't it? And it was just an occasion where probably it was at the heart of when the social media stuff was at its worst. All of a sudden, that word jealousy sort of comes in, from people who are saying she shouldn't be getting this. And what she did do, she let her darts do the talking. And that shut so many people up. But again, she then didn't go to social media to rub it in the nose, as I told you. So this is why I got the invite. And every exhibition, you'll see the name Fallon Sherrock there. The crowd still want to see her. And in 2025, she's got so many matches against Bo Greaves as well. So the life and times of Fallon Sherrock right now is still positive on the back of that first win over Ted.
Then the Grand Slam. First of all, the 170 against Gabrielle Clements when you need it to save your group.
Yeah, and I go back to the fact that you can't teach that. That's something ingrained in these elite players. And Fallon Sherrock, it goes into that as well. It's not when you're in that moment and you've got that bullseye, it's a real sink or swim. And once again, she pinged it with real aplomb. And
then she get to the quarterfinals of that tournament. And in the longest game she ever played in, averaging in excess of a ton, took Peter Wright all the way. And this, by the way, was the version of Peter Wright that was in the middle of winning match plays and world championships. She was taking the best player in the world at the time all the way and probably could have won that, maybe should have won that, she may feel.
I think she really enjoyed that game as well because all the pressure will have been on Peter Wright and he gave it everything that he had. And I thought that was an absolute credit to her because, best of sevens, best of 11s, potentially, there's it. But when you're talking best of 31s, 33s, and she's still averaging like she was there, that was an incredible moment for her.
Then the first women's world match play. Now all the attention was on Fallon. Now Bo Greaves didn't actually play in that tournament. She just won the Lakeside for the first time then. All the attention, all the pressure was on Fallon Sherrock to win that because I suppose at the time, what people were saying was, yes, Fallon's done a lot in terms of trailblazing in the sport. But Lisa's won 4 world championships. Trina's won 10 world championships. Baku has won a couple of world championships. There wasn't yet that tangible title that Fallon can say, that is my one standout trophy that I've won in my career yet.
Yeah, at the iconic venue, Winter Gardens, it was all played in one afternoon as well. And Fallon Sherrock, despite the fact that all those iconic names were there, she wanted to prove not only what she was doing sort of in the general game, she wanted to prove that she was still the best lady player out there. And it was a big, big win for her.
Let's talk now then. Let's talk the future. Where do you see Fallon's game progressing now? Because obviously we see Bo Greaves doing what she's doing and she is very much the player that's pinning up the women's game by winning all these titles, by winning the match play multiple times, by winning the Lakeside multiple times, by putting in numbers where she's top of the Challenge or Dev Tour, Women's Series Order of Merit. Where do you see Fallon now progressing forward with her game?
Yeah, I was commentating on the Women's Series only last week as well. I did quite a bit in 2024 and she's still winning. But we're in the midst of something spectacular in Bo Greaves as well. So the challenge is there for Fallon, and every challenge that she's had in her darting career, she seems to have had answers for. But the biggest challenge of them all could be the fact that this, being a rival to Bo Greaves, and it's just great for the game. It's great, and I think Fallon again would love another Ali Pali moment. And like I say, she's very settled with Cameron Menzies and everything. So maybe she's had that highlight. Maybe there's much more to come from Fallon. She's very, very difficult to read, and that's one of the main reasons why she's so good. I use those word attributes. She won't rub it in your face about what she's achieved, her accolades, what she wants to do. But every time she's had a challenge, she's had an answer. But the biggest one could be in front of her.
Glenn, thank you. Thank you for watching the latest edition of The Story of here at the MODUS Super Series on Pluto TV.